So just to give a flavor of what we'll be moving into very soon, we'll be looking into questions of the form, if you are a theist, if you believe that there is a kind of greatest conceivable being, regardless of whether that takes the form of being Christian or Muslim or Jewish or some other religious kind of creed, you're likely to have some inclination to believe in a being than which there is no greater. And then the question is, if that's something that you believe, then what is your justification for that belief? And we'll be examining some of the more famous attempts to justify beliefs of that sort. For example, we'll be looking at what's known as the argument from design, which tries to show that the extraordinary amount of design or at least apparent design and complexity in the natural world seems to prove that there must have been an intelligent, sentient designer that's responsible for all of it. We'll also be considering the cosmological argument that tries to show that the only possible explanation for all that exists, whether it's complex or not, but just the sheer fact that things exist at all requires an explanation that makes appeal to a GCB. We'll be talking about the ontological argument that tries to show that the very concept of a greatest conceivable being implies by definition that such a being must exist. We'll be talking about an argument from morality that says somehow that in some way believing in a GCB is morally justified because, for example, it makes you a better person. We'll also be considering questions of the form, these are questions that come in the form of what used to be known as natural religion. That's not so much a term that's used today, but it was the case a couple of centuries ago that natural religion was the project of trying to justify a theistic belief on the basis of theoretical justification as opposed, for example, to divine revelation, something of the kind. Okay. So you might also for now think about the question, can there be a practical or pragmatic on the one hand or moral justification for belief in a greatest conceivable being as well? That's something we'll be considering in the fullness of time too. But let me just clarify that for our purposes, especially in a public university like ours, I want us to make sure that we're extremely clear about the difference between the church on the one hand and state on the other. I'm going to be asking you to examine your religious, ethical, and other deeply held beliefs in the course of this semester, and I'll be asking you to look at your own views critically and perhaps engage critically with other people. But let me be clear that I'm not trying to proselytize, debunk, or otherwise change your mind about anything in particular. Instead, what I'm trying to do is get you to approach those beliefs, consider them, ask yourself whether they're beliefs that are justified in the way that you want them to be. If not, then consider changing them, but that's entirely up to you and not something that I want to or am in any position to legislate at all. It's more a matter of you're taking a look at your belief system and seeing what things that are in it are things that you want to stick with, things that you think are still justified and appropriate, or if not, things that need to be modified in some way. And to that end, I want to be clear that I'm very much taken by the remark of Thomas Jefferson, who wrote, "In a Republican nation whose citizens are to be led by reason and persuasion and not by force, the art of reasoning becomes of the first importance." That seems to be a very powerful remark insofar as Jefferson is suggesting that a bulwark of democracy is the ability to look at arguments, look at lines of reasoning, and to see whether or not they are persuasive, as opposed to governing a population by force. We, in a democracy, want to have our minds changed not by fear, but rather by persuasion. And arguments and their assessment are at the heart of that very process. So too, this same Jefferson, where he's buried in Monticello, has on the obelisk that makes up his tombstone remarks that say Thomas Jefferson was President of the United States, he was signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he was also author of the Statute of Religious Freedom for the state of Virginia. That Statute of Religious Freedom for the state of Virginia is the one that I'm focusing on now, because that was one of the early pillars of the separation of church and state for Jefferson and the democracy that came in his wake. And so what I want to suggest to you is that while we will in the course of the semester be considering and asking you to reconsider many of your deeply held beliefs, again, I want to be sure that we're clear that there's no crossing of a line between church and state here, but rather I'll be asking you to think about your views and then changing them if you choose to do so, if you see fit. If you think that your views are fine as they are, then I'll be happy to see them stay the way they were when you came into this course.